Hi guys, I'm the Drink Pro. Today it's the 2019 Thomas H. Handy Rye. Hey everybody, I'm the Drink Pro. Thanks for joining me today. It's going to be a little different than my normal Wednesday review. Normally I pick a bottle off the shelf and I do a review on Wednesdays of something that's in my personal collection and I kind of talk about it and how I feel about it. But today I'm going to do a sample Wednesday, which is a little different, but you'll find out why on Sunday. I've got a very special review coming this coming Sunday, so make sure you tune in for that. But this is also special in its own right. Thomas H. Handy Rye. This is a part of the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection. Part of the reason I'm doing this a little bit out of order, this is kind of a preview of Sunday, is the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection is a very highly sought after series of whiskeys, and I actually asked the Patreon users what whiskey from the collection they wanted me to try the most. Now, the first place whiskey is the Eagle Rare 17, and unfortunately, I've tried to, finagle some different connections, and as of today, I don't have the Eagle Rare 17. But I know I have people that might be able to help me get it. It's just a matter of dealing with the current social distancing makes it a little difficult to obtain. But I do promise an Eagle Rare 17 review is coming. I don't know exactly when, but it'll be as soon as possible. In the meantime, the second place from my poll on the Patreon was the Thomas H. Handy Rye. So I wanted to do this review to, reward the Patreon viewers as much as I possibly can, and I have a special reward for them on Sunday for people who are interested in the BTAC collection, so there's a little sneak preview. The 2019 Thomas H. Handy Rye from the BTAC collection got really high reviews, and is often thought to be one of the best from the collection, maybe next to the William LaRue Weller, which is one I already tasted. Now, Thomas Handy was actually the founder of the Sazerac Company, and he spent time in New Orleans developing the whiskey and creating a profile that became very famous. In fact, Sazerac Rye is one of the most well-known ryes, and it even has its own cocktail named after it, a Sazerac. I plan to make a version of that cocktail in the future for you all to see, but it's a very interesting classic New Orleans flavor profile. This is a relatively young rye as compared to the age statements on other members in the collection. I believe this is just over 6 years old. It's kind of fun to see all the different places the grains come from to create these ryes. The rye grain is actually from Minnesota, and the malted barley is from North Dakota, but the corn is from Kentucky. So we have 3 different states that are all sourcing grain going into the mash bill for this rye. Now, as with the William LaRue Weller, you can find a sheet online that gives you statistics about the 2019 Thomas H. Handy. All of the BTAC series, I believe, have these sheets that offer great levels of detail. I try not to go into too much detail here on it, but I think it's really fascinating. It's a great way to learn more about the product. An easy example is these are barreled again in number 4 charred barrels, which I believe I looked it up last time is the alligator char barrel. That's a very highly charred whiskey barrel, and that really imparts a lot of flavors. One of the fun things about the Thomas H. Handy Rye from 2019 is the stat sheet explains which warehouses and which floors barrels were pulled from to create the batch that eventually went out to the public. Warehouses N, M, and K were selected, and floors 3, 4, and 5. Those 6 different locations make up where these barrels came from that were turned into the Thomas H. Handy Rye as you now pull it off the shelves. It's not a single barrel product. There is an interesting blending process going on, which actually sometimes can be a very good thing. The plus side of a single barrel is it's very pure in the sense of untouched, unedited, unadulterated. This is exactly what comes out of a barrel. But the problem is sometimes that's not a good thing. Sometimes you want a product with a very specific character profile, and you're not going to get that if you're looking at a, single barrel that's just randomly pulled off the shelf, or even one that's very carefully selected off the shelf. You can pull from tens of thousands of barrels and try each one individually, and you might not quite get the exact profile you want. Blending is actually a very valuable and important part of getting a very particular flavor profile. Now, the whiskey that came off of the still for the Thomas H. Handy Rye was actually at 135 proof. That's 67.5% alcohol, very high proof. Now, what's actually in this sample bottle is 62.85, so it actually lost a little bit of proof in the barrel. So without further ado, let's go ahead and break into this 2019 Thomas H. Handy. That really feels like a mouthful every time I say it, but the problem is, unlike with George T. Stagg or William LaRue Weller, where you can offer a shortened version, I don't really want to say I'm having a handy every time I'm talking about this whiskey. Now, it's got a beautiful color to it, no doubt about that. Oh, the handy, it smells wonderful. It's almost minty. It's almost got a spearmint quality on the nose. Very nice sweetness and a rye spice. It's actually really got a lot of interesting herbal qualities. Like I said, very minty, very fresh. That really soft, delicate sweetness on the nose, it's not really a honey characteristic. It's lighter than that. It's like a crispy sugar, maybe like a creme brulee or a light caramel. Very soft and high, sweet. The mintiness is very prominent on the nose. It's very interesting. I also get some floral notes, maybe a geranium quality. Maybe even like a buttercup quality. There's a subtle creaminess underneath all that herbal note and that minty note that's really wonderful in the nose. As I keep smelling it and letting it open up, I'm getting sort of a subtle, very, very subtle citrus character. It really does smell like a fresh garden. Like it really screams wonderful spring or summer, just all of the blooms and the herbs and the flowers. It smells like outdoors in the best way possible. Sometimes you'll get herbal notes that smell a lot more like cut grass, or they smell more like rotten vegetation. These very unpleasant notes, but when herbal notes are presented in a bright, light, fresh way, it's just a sight to behold. All right, let me go ahead and give this a taste. Now, right off the bat, this is quite hot for me because I haven't had anything to drink today. I'm coming into it very plain, and you know, that 62+% really packs a punch. It takes some getting used to. I can really feel the warmth coming down my chest, though. That Kentucky hug is very prominent, and I can tell that the flavors linger for a long time on my mouth. Something that sharp and hot you would expect to burn more than this does, even coming straight out of, you know, nothing to drink, just fresh, clean palate. But this is just warm and spicy almost in my mouth, as opposed to being, you know, sharp and burning. So I really anticipate the more I drink this, the more I'm going to enjoy it. Wow, it really... The mouth very much mimics what I was smelling, which I really like. I get this early sweetness. It's a creamy, soft sweetness early in the palate. The mid-palate is very herbal. It's got these wonderful... They're not as minty. It's more herbal notes, but it's definitely a vegetation kind of quality, but fresh and picked off the vine like fresh herbs out of a garden. You might even get a basil note on this. It's very herb forward. And then as the mid palate dissipates, you get into this interesting soft finish. There's definitely some of the rye spice. There's definitely some barrel showing up, but they're soft and subtle. They don't overpower the grain and the sweetness that kind of is pervasive throughout. So it's a very balanced pour. It's interesting, after tasting it and going back to the nose, I get this interesting subtle sour note. I had somebody once explain that as a tropical fruit note. They said it was like a papaya or a mango, but I don't really get that. I expect those to be a little sweeter. It's almost like the meat of a lemon, but it's not as sharp. Soft, sweet, spicy. Gotta love it. A kumquat. It's kind of like a kumquat almost. A very subtle kumquat note. The flavors that you get from kumquat kind of show up in this. And make your own jokes about kumquats and handies. That's for on your own time. Woo! Man, that's good. That sour note on the nose, when you come back to it after tasting it, it's almost like a green grape or maybe a peach. It's a really interesting fruit note. Maybe a kumquat. There's something in there. There's definitely that sweet vanilla. Oh, it's a creamy, sweet vanilla. It's not really a butterscotch. I know that's a note I've seen people talk about with the new 2019 Thomas H. Handy, but I don't get as much butterscotch. For me, it's more narrow than that. Butterscotch is a rounder, broader flavor. That creamy, sweet vanilla note, it doesn't linger like a butterscotch. It's slow, and then immediately you get to the mid palate where you have this herbal quality that's really wonderful. And I get little hints and notes of something like a cinnamon, like a bitter spice on the back end, like a bitter baking spice. It's not the sweetened cinnamon like a Red Hot. It's like raw, powdered cinnamon. It's really interesting. Those woody notes are starting to show up. The more I sip this, mid-palate and late in the drink, I'm starting to get more and more of that wood characteristic. But it doesn't taste like oak. Oak is a much lighter, brighter wood. This is the richer, deeper wood. So let's go ahead and find out what happens when I add a couple drops of water to it. This is a relatively high-proof whiskey. Now, it does drink pretty gently, so I normally wouldn't add water to it. But because it's so high-proof, I'm very curious to see what happens and see if it opens up at all. It really doesn't. On the nose, at least, it's just gotten much more muted. The The herbal notes are much quieter. The sweetness is kind of blended together. So instead of these separate sweet herbal qualities, you get sort of maybe a honeysuckle sweet herb, combination. It becomes a little bit more cereal-like on the nose as well after adding some water. Let's taste it. It becomes a lot sharper, more bitter, more woody. It loses a lot of its gentle characteristics when I added water to it. It's actually much worse with water. I highly recommend this pour, but I wouldn't recommend adding water to it. Yeah, the barrel bitter really shows up mid and late in the palate. I will say there's more of a chocolate note on the back end when you add water to it, but it's not a pleasant chocolate for me. It's a bitter, chocolate like a bad aftertaste, honestly. So the Thomas H. Handy for me doesn't have that same amazing religious experience as the William LaRue Weller, but it's very good whiskey. You know, the 2019 really presents well. It has wonderful herbal notes. It has a wonderful sweetness. It really is exactly what you want to see from a very classic herbal spicy rye. It's got the sweetness, it's got the herbs, it's got hints of the barrel. Everything is incredibly well balanced. It's got a lot of kick, but not too much, especially for the proof. At almost 63% alcohol, I would expect a lot more burn, but it gives you interesting complexity and sweetness and character without being over the top. Fantastic whiskey, I can't recommend it enough, but it is quite expensive. If you find it for MSRP, you should absolutely snag it up. Would I spend $400 on this bottle? Probably not. This is the kind of bottle that probably for me would be between $150 and $200 if I could find it for that. It's hard to say though, value is such a subjective thing. It's an incredibly good rye. If you really like ryes and you're able to pick this up, I would absolutely consider it. But I know there are other good ryes out there that I plan to review in the near future, but this is really just hitting some high points of wonderful herbal rye notes. I've heard one of the best in the Handy series, and I can see why. It's hard to imagine how you improve on this. I can't point to any one thing and say that shouldn't be there or something else should be there. It really hits all of the high notes. So it's a fantastic whiskey. Highly recommend it. Thanks you all for tuning in so much. Thanks again to the Patreon supporters for voting and picking this as the number 2. I promise I'll get the number 1 soon, but the number 2 selection in the BTAC series. I hope you all consider joining the Patreon and being a part of the community. And in the meantime, let's all keep drinking like professionals. Cheers, guys.